Welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast, where today's brightest minds in the medical device industry go to get their most useful and actionable insider knowledge, direct from some of the world's leading medical device experts and companies.
Are you ready to take your medical device development to the next level? Greenlight Guru is the leading QMS software built exclusively for the MedTech industry. With Greenlight Guru, you'll stay compliant with global regulations while accelerating innovation and time to market. No more paper trails or complex spreadsheets, just a single source of truth to manage your entire product lifecycle. Join the growing list of MedTech professionals who've made compliance easier and faster with Greenlight Guru. Learn more at www.greenlight.guru.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today I want to talk about QMS, as it's often seen as an obstacle, but the absolute best in class use it to their advantage. And I brought Ashkon Rasooli on. He's been on the podcast before. He gave an episode on AI that was a really great episode, but maybe before we get into that, how are you doing, Ashkon?
Doing good. How are you doing, Etienne?
Good. So glad to have you with us today. Maybe I'll let you introduce the topic because this has kind of become your brand a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, today we're going to talk about the fundamentals of QMS and specifically focus on how to optimally implement a QMS. I have introduced the concept of a non-BS QMS that play on the non-burdensome principles by the FDA introduced, but at the end of the day, it speaks to the concept that a QMS, despite having minimal overhead, because there is a cost to quality, should be implemented in the least burdensome manner. And today we're going to talk about that.
You had mentioned that you have principles that you follow and that you've broken this down into 4 principles. So maybe we can go through that. And at the very end, just so people know, what I would like to end with is a lightning round where, say, a founder says, hey, I just found out we're a medical device company and we have to have a QMS. I don't even know what those letters stand for. What do I start with? And we'll just kind of go through that a little bit in a more tactical sense. But let's start with these principles. Take it away.
Absolutely. And these principles are kind of modeled after the principles of the Agile Manifesto. For those of you that have ever tried developing Agile software and studying the Agile methodology, my background is very software and AI focused, and therefore this was top of mind. It is also very much informed by my experience doing quality management work, doing non-quality management work, but also leading quality management systems to certifications. And it is 4 principles. The first one has to do with quality over proceduralism. But what I mean by that is there is often a mistake made where a QMS is seen as a set of procedures embodied in documents that you have to stick to line by line without an understanding of what those procedures are meant to do, the intent behind the procedure. There always needs to be an understanding of what the point of, for example, document control procedure, CAPA, nonconformance, risk management, every single one of these procedures ultimately has an intent. And the intent is a component of big Q quality. And so the first principle is that when you're implementing a QMS, you got to approach it that way. Yes, a QMS is comprised of a set of documents, procedures, work instructions, records, objective evidence of compliance, basically, to those procedures and work instructions. But all of that is with the intent to ensure quality. And so there may come a time where you realize the procedure requires deviating from, and if you're constantly deviating from your procedure, then you got to update the procedure. That's not a good procedure.
And I want to talk about the deviation just briefly, because different points in my career, I've had different experiences where one VP of quality might dictate we are not having any deviations, whereas in others that you have no choice or you're not shipping product. But where's the fine line and how do people handle deviations before that change?
No, that's a very good point. And I will say either extreme is not optimal, because at the end of the day, you got to keep the one thing that shouldn't change in your implementation of QMS is a focus on quality and the objective of the quality management system. Now, with the ever-changing circumstances of your business, your team, your market, it is only inevitable. It's only a matter of time before a pre-established procedure ends up needing updating, needs deviating from. So the VP that mandates a procedure and absolutely does not accept any deviations is most likely being too strict, either adding too much burden to the team, or sometimes not even ensuring quality because the procedure isn't adapting to the realities of the business. On the other hand, procedures are there to ensure consistency in quality because consistency is a fundamental part of quality. And if you've got a VP that is constantly deviating, allowing deviations, if you've got a team that for whatever reason is constantly deviating, what that tells me is this procedure doesn't fit the realities of that business. Therefore, that procedure needs updating. Now, one can argue there might be other scenarios for this, like the team just needs retraining, people don't have the right culture. But looking specifically within the scope of QMS design and architecture, that's what that tells me.
Okay. So the first one was checklist mentality. What's the second principle?
Yeah, quality over proceduralism is the first one. Second one is culture over mandate. You've probably heard this said over and over again, quality is everyone's business. Quality is not just quality's business. When you look at the work done to ensure quality at any company, a very small part of it is done by the team titled quality. Most of the work is actually done by non-quality people. And, title quality is what I'm talking about.
Right.
The quality management system team has the big picture defining procedures, but for it to be effective, there needs to be a culture. And when I talk about culture, what I mean that everyone at the company understands the goal of the quality management system, what quality means for their product, how it fits within the business vision and the mission as a whole. But then more importantly, what role they play in that bigger picture. And with that understanding, you will have individuals autonomously having quality in mind and doing work with quality in mind. This is as opposed to a team that only does quality management system work because the quality regulatory team tells them they have to. They're going to do whatever satisfies that team's requirements. They're not going to go a bit beyond. But also, even that little they do, they're going to do begrudgingly. They're going to be resentful about. And it is only inevitable that the quality of that documentation is poor and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that the documentation is just an after-the-fact checklist with absolutely no value to quality. And we see that over and over again. So the difference between culture versus mandate is culture is everyone understands quality and proactively wants to do what they can do for quality versus mandating is there is a procedure that says I have to do this. It's a mandate. I'll give you an example. I've worked at companies where software engineers would refuse to code unless there was a approved version of software requirements. There was an understanding of what the point of software requirements were, and that if they coded before software requirements were formally approved, that would be a waste of everyone's time. And then I've been at companies where software engineers deployed, bug fixes and quality has to catch them. Now, when you look at those two scenarios, going back to the ultimate topic of this conversation about, least burdensome, the second scenario is a lot more burdensome. Even though initially you think the software engineers are not having the documentation they're pushing and all that, at the end of it, we have to go back, catch that, roll back that release, put in the right documentation in place, all of that retrospectively, all of that duplicate effort. Big picture, the company lost a lot of resources to achieve the same outcome. And so, again, another principle of the non-BS QMS is culture over mandate, because I believe implementing a culture of quality is a lot more efficient than mandating quality.
Culture is an interesting one, and it's slippery and it's hard to really grab hold of. But one of the definitions I've heard, I can't remember who first told me this, but people like us do things like this. And that tells you what the culture is, because everybody has a culture of some sort. And so the people like us do things like this kind of tells you what that is. How do you shift that culture or educate companies to embrace a culture of quality? Do you have any thoughts on how to even accomplish that?
Absolutely. And I will say, even in building the culture, quality is everyone's business. So even in the culture building part of quality, it is a shared responsibility. I can speak to what a QMS team can do best in building the culture. And that is to have, I'm going to go through the other principles as well, but to have a QMS in the non-BS fashion, in the sense that your procedures are easy to understand, they get to the point, they have the right content in there. and they do the right amount of training, your trainings are actually effective. Very often you see training programs that are not effective. They're a simple read and acknowledge of a procedure that is full of, vague words and fluff that people read and just check off and not remember any of it. And so that is the role of the quality management system teams. Then there is the role that top management, top executive management plays, which has to do with prioritizing quality when you're setting company-wide initiatives. Because at the end of the day, every individual at the company is going to have a list of goals and initiatives. And if there's no room allocated for doing quality work, it's just going to get deprioritized. And so you are not able to build it into the culture. And so, again, executive management has a very big responsibility in understanding quality, its requirements, its resource allocation. Once you put those two in place, I have found more often than not that people just want to do the right thing. And so when people are convinced of what quality is about and they have the right information and they have the resources, you will see cultures shape, and you will see cultures. And the thing about cultures is they have inertia. Once you shape them, everyone new coming in will start adopting it, especially because it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, people are going to obviously resist it. But when it makes sense that we do things this way and the because is more than someone said so, right? Then
Okay.
people adopt it.
What about the third one? And maybe I should stop asking you some side questions because I think you're going to answer it as we go along. But yeah, go ahead.
No, these are great clarifying questions. So the third one is redundancy over duplication. With a lot of quality management systems I've seen there, this speaks more to the point of document management and QMS architecture. Often I've seen the same piece of information be captured in multiple templates and therefore multiple records that are built off of that template. The same piece of instruction be captured across multiple procedures, multiple work instructions. The problem with that is it is inevitable over time as people get busy, as time goes by, that you're going to update one instance of that information and you're not going to have time to go align it across the board. I therefore very much favor and believe it is the non-burdensome way to include by reference and not by explicit inclusion, because what happens is it is only a matter of time before what you've got there is misalignment. Or if you have a really good quality management system team that keeps track of the many places that needs to be updated, it is going to be an overhead. There is going to be an overhead associated with that. Now, this is opposed to having redundancy. Sometimes you need redundancy in system design. Redundancy is a risk control measure. It could be a risk control measure in a process that you have. Redundancy could also be a design feature, right? But this is not the same thing as having duplicate content in your documentation.
Yeah.
I'm stopping for any questions.
Yeah. No, this is really good. And do you have any examples of redundancy in a positive sense? And I can just think from a podcasting standpoint, having two microphones, so if one fails, you catch it with the other ones, because the old military saying two is one and one is none. But any suggestions or recommendations from a medical device standpoint?
Absolutely. So, cybersecurity is hot these days. And one of the things that you are required to have in your security operations is what we call a backup and disaster recovery procedure, right? And so that's an example of redundancy. You may have everything in an electronic quality management system or other tools for that matter. You want to be able to, in case of a power outage, in case of a natural disaster, still be able to function and operate. And so you create for your core necessities of your operation a paper backup, right?
Yeah.
Is that duplicate content? Sure, but there's a reason for that. It is a risk mitigation. So that is not what I'm referring to when I say duplication. That is redundancy.
Yeah. Okay. What's number 4?
Yeah, number 4 is conciseness over verbosity. And I've somewhat alluded to this already. At the end of the day, I believe words matter and words are powerful and they have values and they must be treated with respect. There should not be a single word in the QMS that does not serve a purpose. The QMS serves the purpose of ensuring quality and, on a smaller margin, compliance to regulations. If a word in a QMS does not serve that, it should come out. On the extreme end of violating this principle, you see a lot of procedures that have a lot of fluff that you could have removed and nothing of value would have changed, nothing materially would have changed in the intent of the procedure. This type of procedure often ends up being like the least effective in terms of understanding, because you read a lot of words without actually learning anything, without having any substance. And so if you want to have a, non-BS QMS, what you got to have is procedures that are straight to the point. You are going to have, non-quality people reading these procedures and training to them, and they by design have less of a stake in what the procedure says. They just want to know on their end, what is the big picture and where do they fit? What do they need to know? And so to get straight to that and not say much more and much more fluff around it, that makes it a lot easier to manage. It often goes hand in hand with what I said with the prior principle of not having duplication of content. So these two kind of relate to each other. You will have less duplication. You will have much bigger bang for the buck of a procedure.
I love that one. When I edit things, I edit for I write for a certain way. First, I write for myself because I want to write something. I'm writing something. And then I write for, who's actually going to read it? So I edit it for that person. And then the third person I edit for is who hates me or who really dislikes whatever it is that I have to say or typically disagrees. And I try to meet that person. And so, okay, Etienne, how is this applicable here? When you're writing for an SOP, I can't help it. I'm getting a little excited about this point. A lot of times, what I think SOPs are written for is for the inspection, for when the FDA shows up. That's what we write them for, because we want to cover ourselves in so many ways, and in a way that's good. But I think they should first be written to meet the company's needs, and then edit it for the actual person who's going to be reading it so that he understands it, and then you edit it for the inspection. What do you think, though?
100%. I actually think of QMS the way I think of products that the QMS manages, right? And with products, we talk about defining the user groups and the use cases, right? And with the QMS too, we got to define the audience, the user group, and the use cases. And there are at the top level 3 user groups for a QMS. The first one's the auditor. This could be the internal auditor. This could be an external person looking at it if you have a client that is doing a supplier audit, or it could be a regulator like the FDA, right? That's the third group. They do not belong to your organization. As someone who's seen this for the first time, they just want to ensure that you are complying with regulations, you are ensuring quality as appropriate. The second group is non-quality management system people. Their use case of this procedure is understanding, again, big picture and small picture. Big picture, how does this process ensure quality? What piece of quality does this ensure? Small picture, what role do I play in that? What are the requirements from me? The third user group is the quality management system group that has to maintain it, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they are tasked with maintaining what is a very complicated system, and it grows in complexity exponentially as a company grows. You want to optimally meet the needs of those 3 user groups. Now, this does speak to optimal QMS structure as well, because there are times where you're going to decide the language that satisfies an auditor is not going to be the language that is appropriate for an internal user. And so you create 2 different documents that talk to each other. And this has to be a case-by-case thing. You want to have structures in your QMS, and you're going to have the auditor-friendly sets of documents, which then point to, let's say, process implementation and work instruction that is more non-regulatory person-friendly, right?
Yeah.
So what I just said also speaks to how you optimally design your QMS, but you got to keep those 3 user groups in mind. And one of the primary culprits of having, burden in the QMS is the fact that we try to fit all 3 into the same sentence. We forget one user group. We just don't address the needs of all 3.
Okay. Concise versus verbosity, redundancy over duplication, culture versus mandate. Remind me the first one. I don't think I wrote it down correctly.
Quality versus proceduralism.
Quality versus proceduralism. Proceduralism. That's a word I can't pronounce.
Takes practice.
Okay. That's really good. I really like those 4 principles. So let's kind of skip to our lightning round, where I have this imaginary scenario where someone calls you up on the phone, says, Ashkon, I just found out I'm a medical device company. I thought we were just going to be doing some kind of nasal cleanse thing and we're going to be over the counter or whatever. I don't know. But it turns out we're a medical device and maybe we're class 2. We'll just use it as for putting up our boundaries. What is this QMS and how do I start? Do you just come up with this big stack of, all right, here's 40 SOPs, let's get cracking, or what's step 1?
Yeah, so that is what not to do, the 40 stack of SOPs. And unfortunately, more often than not, that is what happens. I would like to speak to the process in a second, but the one point I want to make before doing that is I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to engage with a quality advisor and a regulatory advisor, even though you may not have full-time projects and enough work for a full-time headcount on the quality management system side of things. For a company that is just trying to get into the market, because there will be a lot of optimizations and efficiencies you can actually get from that. If you do not do that, focus on just product development and get all the way to, I have a product ready to go. Let's talk to someone to bring it to market. What you find yourself doing is now identifying a lot of things you didn't know about before, having to either go back and change your design from a risk management standpoint or regulatory standpoint, but also realizing that you haven't architected your product possibly optimally for things like 62304 safety classification and that kind of stuff. And then you're retrospectively building a bunch of documentation just to get clearance. It is only bound to happen that the documentation is basically, because you're trying to remember things that you did like months ago or years ago,
right?
Suboptimal in content and just, barely meeting the bar. So I like to make the point of try to engage early with a regulatory quality, if not a full-time headcount, like an advisory on an hourly basis. But the way the process would go is, at the end of the day, the quality management system is about ensuring 2 things. Top of the list, quality. Second, compliance. I'll start with compliance just because that's more straightforward and I get to quality. So on the compliance side, you just got to identify the applicable regulations because those are things that your QMS needs to show compliance to. And then there might be actually work you need to do outside of QMS to show compliance to those regulations. Typically, there are 3 different categories of input that go into that: geography, your business model, and then the product information. So geography, are you going to be located? Where are you going to be located? Are you going to be in the States, in Europe, Canada? And where are you going to be selling? Those are 2 important questions to ask. Second question is, what exactly is your business model? Because let's take the US, for example. Within every geography, there are different roles defined for different businesses depending on their business models, right? So are you a supplier, like a contract manufacturer? Are you a medical device manufacturer, like an end device manufacturer that holds complete responsibility for the product safety and effectiveness? Are you a distributor? Are you just importing, exporting? And then there are, subcategories under that, like I build in the US, but I only export to the US, and export only manufacturer, that kind of stuff. So what is your business model? That becomes another input into identifying your regulations. This is on the compliance side still. Further questioning becomes the kind of products you're going to be involved in. So your product characteristics, because that kind of drives what applicable regulations are. Is it going to be electromechanical? Is it going to be software only, like SAMD product? Is there going to be AI? So the technologies you use there, the application of it, the intended use, the indication use of that product, those also drive, the identification of these regulations that you have to comply with.
Yeah.
So geography, business, and product information, those become inputs into identifying the regulations. That's compliance. But the second question every business has to ask themselves, because the first set everybody asks themselves anyways, because they have to.
Yeah.
The second question everyone has to ask themselves is, what role does quality play? What does quality look like for my product? And there's a spectrum, and you got to define where on the spectrum you are. On the low end of the spectrum, I'm going to have the absolute minimum quality necessary for me to get to market. Quality is just a means to an end for me. I'm just trying to clear the regulatory hurdle. On the far end of that spectrum is, quality is actually part of my business plan. It is what differentiates me in the marketplace. I want to be known for quality. Because at that point, quality becomes part of your product requirements. Where you decide as a company you land on that spectrum also is a very important factor in designing your quality management system. We've got even non-medical device examples of this where companies try to differentiate themselves by quality, and obviously they charge a premium for it. They kind of fit into a niche, high value, therefore high price corner of the market. We've got companies like Toyota that are known for their reliability in the car. When you think of quality, those are the names that kind of come to mind. Quality could be in service. When you ask about companies like, Costco and Nordstrom, everybody thinks of good customer service, right? Quality customer service, right? That's kind of what differentiates them. And people, pay the premiums for those. So this applies to the medical device similarly. Do you want to be differentiated by quality, or is quality just a means to an end? But after you identify your quality requirements at the executive level, and then you identify your compliance requirements, that's when we get into designing your QMS optimally. And that's when that non-BS manifesto comes in.
Yeah.
You want to apply those principles and design your QMS.
How does Greenlight Guru line up in your mind for that, if you don't mind me asking?
No, for sure. So I see Greenlight Guru or any EQMS or any tool for that matter, because, I mentioned my background in software, and there's a lot of non-EQMS tools involved in software development. There's like bug tracking, there's deployment management, there's customer complaint tracking. So there's often a suite of software products that underlie basically the quality management system. You basically pull in information. These products, when used appropriately, and by using appropriately, I mean configure it appropriately for the process you've decided you need based on, your QMS design. They save a ton of time and a ton of confusion. They enable further possibilities for your business as well. I have worked with paper-based QMS systems. Good luck with remote work on that, right?
Yeah.
I have worked in environments where when we wanted to do a product validation, the set of protocols were pushed around on a cart. There were, easily thousands of pages of a test protocol, which then needed to be approved. And so we would push the cart around to different approvers, and you can imagine how effective that was and how efficient that was. So
Yeah.
in terms of introducing efficiency, the tool enables having a non-BS QMS by operationally streamlining it.
Yeah. It doesn't automatically get you there. I get that. It's one of those things, I think, where we shape our tools and then our tools shape us.
Yeah.
And so you want to shape it correctly. Absolutely.
100%. Yeah. I've been involved in countless process optimization projects in different environments. And one of the biggest pitfalls is to define the project as pick a tool.
Yeah.
It is often pick a tool and design a process that goes with the tool, and define everything that goes around it in terms of user instructions, rollout, transition, and what maintenance is going to look like. You need to have all of that in scope of your project, and then you're going to make the right decisions.
Very cool. Any other piece of advice you have for this theoretical founder who's interested in setting up his QMS?
I talked about, early engagement, defining where quality fits within your general business model. I talked a little about adequately resourcing it after you've done that.
I meant to go back and emphasize something, because that spectrum of where you fall on the quality spectrum, I think is actually really powerful. Because if you're a medical device, okay, there's a certain bar you have to reach. And if you want to make quality your differentiator, I think it's, in the past, I've heard people say, well, every company should do that. Well, no industry does every company make themselves the absolute best as far as quality goes. It's just not even possible. There is a hierarchy. And I think that's a more realistic approach to looking at that, because you're right. There's always, in every industry, it's typically one company that sets quality apart as their differentiator. And I've never heard anyone else kind of highlight that. So I thought that was really interesting that you pointed that out.
100%. And we got to acknowledge as quality professionals that there is a cost to quality. This is why quality products cost more than non-quality products, medical device or otherwise. There is a cost to quality. The question is, how much is quality worth to you, to your consumers? It is often also underestimated the value that quality brings because it is only highlighted when something goes wrong.
Right.
It is really, I have yet to see a nice, effective characterization of the cost of poor quality, right?
Right.
The cost of lack of quality. There is a huge cost to that. It is hard to quantify that, let's say, for your finance team prospectively. When it happens, all plans get derailed. You got to put teams on fighting fires. You got to go back and redo work, which would have initially been done correctly at a fraction of the time and effort, right? There was, the analysis. I'm going to give you a software example for software defects. Most of them can be traced back to the requirements not being defined at the very beginning of the product development phase, not defined accurately, correctly, or comprehensively. This would have been a lot easier to catch. The cost of these software bugs to fix exponentially go up the later you fix them, right? Same thing happens with non-software products. And so one of the problems we have in determining the value of quality and, balancing that against the cost of quality is that we cannot prospectively estimate. But that does exist. That is the reality that we got to keep in mind. And then with that in mind, identify where we want our quality bar.
Yeah. Okay. Any other piece of advice for this founder, this theoretical founder who realizes that he has to set up this QMS and really is trying to figure out where to begin?
Yeah. Going back to early engagement, we've, come to terms with the concept of design for manufacturing. We've come to the concept of, design for sustainability, that kind of stuff. So DFX. We need to talk about design for regulatory or design for quality for that matter. We don't talk about that enough. There are optimization values you get from early engagement with the right quality management system people, granted, who can speak engineering. When you do early engagement at the architecture level, even, you can architect your product such that it is localized with its risk. For example, I'm going to talk about the concept of safety classification in 62304. You can create segregated software items such that you've got all of the risk concentrated in one software item. Therefore, the burden of higher change control only applies when changes are being made to that piece versus all the other pieces. More often than not, quality comes after a bunch of coding has been done. You've got your architecture in place, and at this point, it's too late to re-architect this huge effort. What happens is quality has no choice but to apply change control at the highest maximal requirement to the entire product. And so here you are for years on end, you're going to have to do more burdensome change control than necessary in that scenario. So that's an example of design for quality, right? Or design for regulatory for that matter. The other example is roadmap reviews. If you have a roadmap in mind in terms of planning releases, again, I'm talking software, but even planning product changes, rolling non-software product changes out. Early consultation with someone on the quality side will tell you this change, you can just do a letter to file for. This change is going to require usability testing. This change is going to require a repeat of your clinical study, each one of which is an additional burden for rolling out the change control. Now, you can optimize your overall vision by grouping the ones that require usability testing together, by grouping the ones that require a submission together, the ones that require clinical testing together. Because otherwise, next thing you know, you do usability testing. Next thing you know, something important you want to implement requires a repeat of your usability testing. That is inefficient. You've just doubled up on effort when you didn't have to, right? So you could have saved that by early engagement at the roadmap level. Like, these are just ideas right now. Engage quality regulatory. And I just want to highlight the inefficiencies of the alternate scenario, right? You gain a lot of efficiencies by early engagement of the quality regulatory team.
I really like the design for regulatory. My mind was just kind of spinning on that a little bit. When you talked about from a software perspective, it's a good lesson. I think I would expect physical product manufacturers probably think about it to a certain degree, but to isolate any potential changes to one section of your design so that you're potential design verification or future verifications, if you have any kind of risk issues, can be isolated to the to that section or any high risk areas. That's really powerful.
Another, impact of risk is, if you do early risk assessment, even at the high level, and you don't do a full detailed FMEA, for example, just do a high level risk assessment, right there and then you can identify, we are going to need risk controls at the gross high level, level in these areas. And therefore, what you think is going to take you 6 months is actually going to take you 3 months, because you also have to build X, Y, and Z, right?
Yeah.
And so it just helps you have greater, more accurate estimates.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, any other in your brand that you're building, any other pieces of advice, any last pieces, words of wisdom before we close it out?
No, I mean, if I had to summarize, I would say, quality is about more than compliance. The QMS is about more than compliance. At the end of the day, when you look at a standard like 13485, which is based on 9001, which is non-medical device specific, the ultimate goal of that standard is ensuring customer requirements are met, which applies across the board, which is a valid business case. It has nothing to do with regulatory compliance. These are written by engineers who've lived through, lack of systems and try to proceduralize it. You don't need to know the details and ins and outs of, quality and regulatory as a business founder. That's what, quality regulatory professionals like myself, do. But what you should know is the earlier the engagement, even in an advising capacity, the better it is for your business, and it can save you a ton of resources.
Yeah. Really cool. Thank you so much, Ashkon. I appreciate it. I always enjoy getting to talk to you, and look forward to the next time. Those of you you've been listening to the Global Medical Device Podcast. We'll let you get back to it. But until next time, take care.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, can I ask a special favor from you? Can you leave us a review on iTunes? I know most of us have never done that before, but if you're listening on the phone, look at the iTunes app, scroll down to the bottom where it says leave a review. It's actually really easy. Same thing with the computer. Just look for that leave a review button. This helps others find us, and it lets us know how we're doing. Also, I'd personally love to hear from you on LinkedIn. Reach out to me. I read and respond to every message, because hearing your feedback is the only way I'm going to get better. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.